I was curious as to whether or not you do any work yourselves with the ANSF, transporting ground forces, or any interaction with the ANA Air Corps.
Absolutely. Most of the routine sustainment stuff, we usually have one or two ANA soldiers on board that are going from point A to point B. But when we do deliberate operations where we actually go out to do an air assault on a target and put a ground force in somewhere and allow them to kind of bypass IED belts and not have to drive, it really allows us a great measure of flexibility and surprise. In almost every case that we've done a deliberate operation, it's always partnered with ANSF. So for example, on Op Mostarak, about half of the troops that we lifted were ANA soldiers and the other half were British soldiers. So, and that's very typical. One thing that we're working on now is to try and do a little bit of work with the ANA Air Corps with their Mi-17s. There's a few that are based here in Kandahar, and we're trying to work them in to be able to resupply their own soldiers. They're under the mentorship of some U.S. Air Force pilots, and what we're trying to do is within the schedule allow us to escort them or to help them along so that they can pick up more of the load and supply their own soldiers, because ultimately that's what's going to help us leave Afghanistan as NATO, is for the Afghans to be able to fend for themselves, and that includes doing all the aviation roles and everything else that we're doing for them right now.
Wow, I had no idea that you guys were doing that much interaction with them on that. That's fantastic.
It's really interesting. If I can throw in a plug, some of these guys have been flying Mi-17s or Mi-8s for 20 years, and some of them have these amazing stories. So we've had a few social occasions with them where we just get to chat with some of the pilots. And they flew with the Russians back in the 70s, and were exiled. In one case, one guy moved to Pakistan for 10 years and then moved back once the Taliban were kind of in power, flew for them for a while. Once the Taliban were overthrown, he took his Mi-8, landed it in Kabul at the commanding general's place and said, "Captain so-and-so reporting for duty." So it's really great to see a completely different perspective on aviation from some of these guys. It's pretty cool.
Those are quite the stories that you got there.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of stories, tell me on a personal note, what's surprised you most about your tour so far?
To be honest, I don't know if I've really had any big surprises. I've known it was going to be busy. I know we were going to be challenged completely. I knew that our troops were going to be good, but I guess the thing that has surprised me is how well we're doing. I mean, every time I go out and I walk around, I talk to the guys on the line who are fixing aircraft, or the logisticians who are driving the refueling trucks, or those kind of things. Everybody is super happy to be here, and they're all giving 110% all the time, and it's showing in the results of what we're doing with the unit. We're doing lots of flying. We're providing great support to the guys on the ground, and everybody's super proud to be here. I expected guys would be a little bit more weary of being around Kandahar by this point, but the professionalism of our guys is even more than I'd ever expected as their commanding officer.
That's interesting that you say that. When I was over there a year ago, I found exactly the same thing surprised me. I knew morale was going to be high. I had no idea it was going to be as high as it was, and I was surprised at the level of morale amongst civilians. It blows me away how everybody's pulling together for and everybody the focus is thick in the air. Everybody's pulling towards a common goal.
Yep. Everybody wants to be here and help out, and that makes a big difference, right? They're all motivated and they're doing a great job.
Now, with that, I mean, it's not always tea and crumpets over there. What's frustrated you the most?
Getting parts. I think that's a pretty easy one.
Yeah.
We're halfway around the world. Chinooks are flying all over the place, Iraq, Afghanistan, and you name it. There's a shortage of Chinook parts, and because we jumped on the Chinook wagon, I guess you could say, at the last minute, we've had difficulty setting up the supply chain the way we normally would in a project that we would run in Canada normally. So it's same thing for Griffin parts. It's not all rosy there all the time, because parts come from Calgary. We need to get them to Trenton, and then the airlift out of Trenton is limited at times, or our contractors are limited. it's not a showstopper. It just means it's an extra. Sometimes you wait an extra week for something, whereas at home you'd get it a little sooner. So that's really the only thing that's kind of slowed us down, I guess, would be we have the guys here ready to fix aircraft. They just don't have the parts to get them, and I don't know how to get around that other than if we moved Afghanistan to, say, right beside Canada.
Yeah.
And that obviously isn't going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. What most concerns you going forward with the last couple of months of your tour coming up?
We've had a good run so far. We've done lots of great operations, but generally speaking, things have been relatively quiet out in the area of operations. And I guess my concern is that as we go into the spring and everything we've heard from the insurgents is that fighting is going to ramp up again in the spring. We're, as we call the fighting season, things are going to get more difficult for our guys at the time where they've already been here for 6 months and they've been flying 80 or 90 hours every 30-day period, and guys are starting to get tired. So it's just, it's a bit of a leadership challenge to make sure that they stay motivated and focused to make sure that we get everybody home safely.
And the flip side of that is I'm curious as to what's made you most proud of your people.
It's what we've actually done. I look around and we see it all the time. You run into some troops at the mess who've come in from a forward operating base, and they say, "Oh, you're one of the helicopter guys. Hey, listen, thanks for the ride that we've given." Those are the things that, whether you're a technician or a clerk, if somebody comes up to you and gives you a thanks like that, it's immediately obvious that we're making a difference out there to the guys on the ground, and that's the important thing, to make sure that they can get their job done and we can bring everybody or as many people as possible home safely.
Now, do you find that most of your day is caught up with the leadership and management job of being a commanding officer, or do you still get a chance to get out and do a lot of flying yourself?
I've been doing a fair amount of flying. I could always do more, but I'm a pilot, so there's almost no such thing as too much flying. There's certainly not as much administrative stuff as there would be at home, and part of that is because we've already screened out a lot of the people who might have problems, whether they're medical problems or disciplinary problems or whatever. Those aren't the guys that we brought on tour with us here generally.
Right.
So operations here for me are very much operations focused. I'm very much into the details with my crews to make sure that we've got all the bases covered and the risk mitigated for the flying that we're doing, and to make sure that we can carry out the operations that we've been tasked with.
Well, in that case, from either a leadership or from a flying standpoint, from a pilot standpoint, what's been your most memorable moment so far on the tour?
I'd have to say at this point Op Mostarak, because it was such a big deal. I don't know if you have all the details, but really we moved 1,100 troops. There were over 40 helicopters involved from the Canadians, the Brits, and the Americans. It was a very complex op that we spent weeks planning. And, to be able to go out and do that and to showcase the capabilities of Canadian aviation, we had embedded journalists with us as well. And to see how well everybody pulled together and pulled that op off with the complexity that was there really tells me that we're world class. We're at least as good as the Americans and the Brits.
All right, last question for you, Colonel. What do Canadians need to know about what they're doing over there that they don't hear enough about?
The good things that are happening out there in the area of operations. I know from being privy to a lot of the intelligence information that comes in and knowing guys that have been here in theater before, things generally do seem to be getting better out there. We see more and more Afghans kind of going about day-to-day life. They're doing a great job of trying to get on with their normal life and, have a safe and prosperous kind of family and not have to worry about some guy knocking on their door in the middle of the night and pointing a gun at them. So things like that still happen. Obviously, it's by no means a completely safe country, but even my perception is that things have improved since we've been here already. And it's not just because of us; it's because of what the entire international community's been doing. But particularly in the Canadian area of operations, I think our Canadian soldiers really know their stuff and they're doing a great job out there.
Colonel Smyth, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Best of luck with your mission, and make sure you come home safe, okay?
Thanks a lot.